The relationship between Israel and Hamas is one of enduring conflict, marked by violence, mistrust, and political deadlock. Hamas, considered a terrorist organization by Israel, the United States, and several other countries, controls the Gaza Strip. Gaza is a densely populated Palestinian territory. Israel maintains a blockade on Gaza, citing security concerns. Hamas's charter calls for Israel's destruction. It rejects a two-state solution. This stance further complicates the situation. The group frequently engages in rocket attacks against Israel. Israel responds with military operations in Gaza. This cycle of violence has resulted in countless casualties on both sides. The conflict's origins can be traced back to the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This conflict is rooted in competing claims to the same land. Years of failed negotiations, broken agreements, and escalating violence have deepened the divide. The absence of trust between the two sides makes any prospect of a lasting peace seem distant and elusive. The international community remains deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The ongoing conflict has resulted in widespread poverty, unemployment, and a lack of essential services. The repeated rounds of violence have had a devastating impact on Gaza's infrastructure and economy. February 20th, 2025, marked a somber day for Israel as the bodies of 4 hostages were returned by Hamas. The return was part of a fragile ceasefire agreement. The agreement was reached after weeks of intense negotiations. The bodies belonged to Oded Lifshitz, an 83-year-old man, and Shiri Bibas, along with her 2 young children, Ariel and Kafir. The circumstances surrounding their deaths remain a point of contention. Hamas claims that all 4 hostages died in Israeli airstrikes during the recent conflict. However, the Israeli Prime Minister's office asserts that Lifshitz was tragically killed in captivity by Islamic Jihad, a militant group allied with Hamas. The conflicting accounts highlight the deep mistrust and animosity that continue to plague the relationship between Israel and Hamas. The handover of the bodies took place in the Gaza Strip. The atmosphere was tense and heavily guarded. Coffins draped in Israeli flags, each bearing a photograph of the deceased, were displayed on a stage. The backdrop featured banners with anti-Israeli messages. One banner depicted Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu as a vampire. Masked and armed Hamas militants stood guard during the ceremony. After the brief ceremony, the coffins were carefully loaded onto Red Cross vehicles. These vehicles transported the bodies to Israeli forces waiting at the border crossing. The return of the bodies, while a deeply emotional and somber occasion, marked a small step towards easing tensions. The ceasefire agreement offered a glimmer of hope for the families of the remaining hostages. They continue to pray for their safe return. The return of the hostages' bodies sparked an outpouring of grief and outrage across Israel. As the convoy carrying the coffins made its way through southern Israel, thousands of Israelis lined the highways, waving flags and paying their respects. The nation mourned the loss of its citizens, united in grief and anger. A nighttime vigil held in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square drew thousands of mourners. Candles illuminated the square as people gathered to remember the victims and offer condolences to their families. President Herzog addressed the crowd, expressing his profound sorrow and asking for forgiveness for the government's inability to protect and retrieve the hostages sooner. The Israeli government faced intense criticism for its handling of the hostage crisis. Opposition leaders accused the government of making concessions to Hamas and failing to prioritize the hostages' safe return. The public demanded accountability and justice for the victims. The tragedy reignited the debate about Israel's security policies and its approach towards Hamas. The return of the bodies, while a step towards fulfilling part of the ceasefire agreement, did little to quell the anger and frustration felt by many Israelis. The incident served as a grim reminder of the human cost of the ongoing conflict and the deep scars it has left on Israeli society. The return of the hostages' bodies marked a pivotal moment in the ongoing ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas. The truce, brokered by Egypt and other international actors, aims to bring an end to the latest round of violence and pave the way for a more lasting peace. Under the terms of the agreement, Hamas is set to release 6 living hostages on February 22, 2025. This release will be in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. 4 more bodies are expected to be returned the following week. However, the future of the ceasefire remains uncertain. Hamas continues to demand a lasting ceasefire and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. The group insists on an end to the blockade, which it argues has crippled Gaza's economy and subjected its people to immense suffering. On the other hand, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, backed by the Trump administration, aims to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and weaken its grip on Gaza. Complicating the situation further is Trump's controversial proposal to relocate Palestinians from Gaza to other Arab countries. The proposal has been met with widespread condemnation from Palestinians, who view it as an attempt to erase their presence and undermine their right to self-determination. The proposal has also drawn criticism from the international community, which sees it as unrealistic and counterproductive. The ceasefire negotiations are taking place against a backdrop of immense distrust and animosity. Years of failed negotiations and broken promises have left both sides skeptical of the other's intentions. The situation is further complicated by internal divisions within both Israel and the Palestinian territories. These divisions make it difficult to reach a consensus on any peace agreement.